Okay, our Gemara today is Daf Nun Ches 58. So that's right, 58. But we're going to just review the Gemara, the Gemara from before, because once you visualize it, you can understand what's going on over here. Here is the way they make onions. This is the way they make onions. They plant it you could plant it, and then you could watch from a bulb of an onion, it grows like this. And that you cut the top part off. If you leave it, maybe it'll become a bulb, but they cut the top part off. It looks like scallions, but that's the onion right over here. Now, good restaurant will actually grow their own onions and their own herbs in their backyard. So what the Gemara's question over here is, just look on the right side of the screen. A man planted Shemitah onions, okay? So I put a number 7 over here, Shemitah onions. But he planted it in the 8th year. Now, Shemitah onions are prohibited to eat. But he planted it in the 8th year and it grew these greens. Can you eat the greens? The question is, are these greens number 7? Because since they are nourishing itself from the original bulb of the original plant of the original onion from the 7th year, so these greens remain usher. Or no, since they outgrew their father, so to speak, they outgrew the original bulb, so now they're the more important one. So we look at it as a number 8. It's like new onions growing in number 8, and therefore the green will be permitted. So that's the question. How do you view these onions? As a number 7, since it was planted with a Shemitah bulb, is the whole thing still remains usher? Or do you look at it as number 8?
What if an apple falls off of a tree during Shemitah and the seeds grow a tree?
Right.
And it was Shemitah apple.
Excellent question. Well, the answer is the Shemitah apple, the seed disappears.
It goes into the ground.
It goes into the ground, but it disintegrates, right? So the seed it becomes something else. Here, the root, the seed remains intact as you put it in. So that's the point. Here it remains intact. So the Gemara says that since it doesn't disintegrate, so it's as if it's all part of the 7th year. Hi, Sheldon. We just began the Gemara.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
We're discussing an onion. Imagine this is the way they plant onions. So they plant a 7th year Shemitah bulb onion. You got it? And then these growths are edible. I mean, this is how you make scallions or whatever.
Scallions, yeah, absolutely.
So the question is, when you planted it in the 8th year, but it's a Shemitah onion. Well, the Shemitah onion is usher. And the 8th year, the Shemitah onion is usher. But you planted it in the 8th year. So now in these growths, do these growths are permitted to eat because they outsize the original onion? Or since they take their nourishment still, the original 7th year onion, so it's considered to be a Shemitah onion. The whole thing will.
Yeah. Baruch, before you get, I was thinking about all of this, and also when we did, I think it was Yevamos, when we talked about grafting and the Ola and all that. And we know that halachically, anything that you graft becomes part of that, of the mother entity. It becomes part of that, the whole thing. So in this case,
right, you're precisely right. The Gemara is going to bring that up.
So this it makes a lot of sense then that if the origin is still there, okay, there's something left of the origin that's considered the mother, and everything else becomes is part of the mother, the origin of that. So if the origin was halakhically limited, in other words, or if it was against halacha, so should be the daughter, whatever was left that grows from it.
Even if it's bigger than the original.
Even if it's bigger, I think so, yeah.
Okay, fabulous. That's exactly what the Gemara is going to say in a minute.
Okay.
Let me just see if that's quoted in Yevamos.
Yevamos we talked about when we talked about grafts and the Ola. I think that's where I think it was from Yevamos.
Right, somewhere. Fabulous.
Yeah,
fabulous. Let's read it, and we're going to get that. The Gemara is going to get that at the end of the page. We're starting from, just to review, from Nun Zayin Amud Beis. Yishmael, and then the rest of the daf is very easy. Yishmael ish kvar yama va'amri le ish kvar yidima. This man Yishmael, either he lived by the ocean, so he didn't have too many rabbis to ask. Helabiyadi, he came up with this following question: Batzil onion akore b'shvius, that was the main, it was picked in shvius, right? So it was the main onion comes from Shemitah. And you held on to it, which you were not supposed to, because onions you're supposed to get rid of at a certain time. You can't hold on to Shemitah produce. You have to get rid of it. So what did he do? Unatai b'shminis, and he planted he planted the onion in Shemitah year. V'rabba gudulav al ikurai. And that's exactly it. The growth overpowered the main Shemitah bulb. And this was his question. Gidul of heter, what grows is permitted. The ikarai aser, and the ikar is aser. Kavan the rabbi gidul of mi ikarai, oisin gidul and heter malin is iser. Since there's more growth than main part, so then the growth will neutralize the iser. Oiloi, or would it not? Hi, Lewis. We just began. We're discussing this, that if a person planted a Shemitah bulb on the 8th year, so the bulb of this onion is from Shemitah, and it grew in the 8th year, are these greens still usher, since it's coming from a bulb from Shminis, an onion that's Shemitah, or we look at it as the 8th year? So the Gemara says, "Asur l'kamei d'Rabami lo yahava biyadi." They came to Rabami. He didn't have an answer to this question. Asur l'kamei d'Rabbi Yitzchak napacha. They came to Rabbi Yitzchak napka. Napka, either he was a blacksmith, so he was working for a living. So this Rabbi Yitzchak had the answer. Pshat lamin hada. He had an answer. The Amar Rab Chanina Trisai. He had Chanina Trisai. It's an odd name, but Rab Chanina from Tris. He said in the name Amar Rab Yanai. He said like this, similar case. Batzel shel truma shenatoi, v'rabu gedulav al ikarai muta. If you have a truma onion that you planted in the ground and it sprouted up, all these growths coming out of the onion, so then, and the growths are much more than the main principle, the main bulb onion, the source onion, so then it's not a truma onion anymore. The whole thing is viewed as a non-truma onion, mutter. So it's permitted. And therefore, even a non-Kohen can eat that, because even though when it started off from a truma onion, but it grew so much, it now turns the onion itself, the source onion, out of truma and into something permitted by a non-Kohen. So that would be proof that we say that we look at the growth as a separate entity from its source. That's the point. We look at the growth as a separate entity from the source. Rabbi Yomi said in the name of Rabbi Zika, Shavik man tvarein v'avik echad. You chose one Amoira, but you left 2 Amoirim. So what did you leave? You left 2 Amoirim. What happened over there? So the Gemara is saying, the Gemara is saying like this, what Sheldon wanted to say. The Amar Rabbi Bo, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Yalda shesibcha shbizkeina. Exactly what you said. You take a vine that is a young vine that is an arla vine, okay? An arla vine. And what did you do with it? You grafted it, like you said, to an older vine, to a vine that's not arla. But this vine that had the arla had a few grapes on it, like tiny, tiny grapes. Uba Paris, it had grapes on it. Afal Pisha, I see from the side, even though these grapes grew 200 times their original size, also they always remain asa, since the source of these grapes come from an arla tree. So even though it grew, and we did draw its nourishment probably from the old tree, even it grew 200 times bigger because you grafted it, it will always remain also exactly what you said, Sheldon. And the Amr Rab Shmuel Bar Nachmani, Amr Rab Yonasan, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said in Rabbi Yonasan, Botzol Shenatoy Bekerem Benekar HaKerem. Let's say you had an onion, you planted it in a vineyard. Oh boy, you planted an onion next to a vine. So now the onion becomes klayim. You're not permitted to eat that onion. And then you uprooted the vineyard the vine, so it's not next to a grapevine anymore. So the onion still remained in the ground, even if it grew to a balloon size, a watermelon size. Usser, that always remains usser. That onion remains usser. So we see that as long as the source is still in existence, so then no matter what grows from that source, it will never mevatel, it will never neutralize the original. So therefore, what the Gemara is saying is that same thing over here, that since it would grow from a Shemitah onion, no matter how much is going to grow out of it, we should say it should never neutralize the original source. It shouldn't neutralize the original source.
And Bernard, it was from Yuma, not Yevamos. I'm sorry.
Yuma. Okay.
Yeah.
But at least you got the topic, what we're talking
about. It was about the Orla, but it was in Yuma, not Yevamos. Sorry.
Fabulous. So that's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara just wants to go back and forth on this topic. They came before Rabbi Ami. He had another source that could possibly shed light on this question. Rabbi Yitzchak said in the name of Yochanan, litra b'tzalim. Let's say you have a whole bunch of bulbs of onions that you're using to plant, like in this picture over here, like you put a whole bunch of onions to set out to make a planting, and these onions shetikna. You actually took off meiser of the original source onions, uzra'a, and then you planted it, and all this growth happened. You have to give new time meiser. Misaseres lefi kuli. You have to again give meiser, and because the new growth neutralizes the original source. So even though I gave meiser on the onions that I planted, but now new growth came out of the onion. So now we look at the onion as a new entity, and therefore it's the whatever grew out of it is so much larger than its original source. So it neutralizes it. It compares as if it's not in existence anymore. And you have to retake meiser. So we see that it does neutralize things. Alma, oislin gedulim, those growth, mevatlin, ikar, could neutralize the original source. So the Gemara wants to extend that to our case. Let's go back to our case. Man planted these onions in the 7th year. It grew in the 8th year. So these 8th year, it becomes, these growths should have a din like 8-year onions, and it will neutralize the original onions. And therefore, it's a new entity. So the Gemara says that you dilma l'chumra shiny. Really, what would you, by the case of the meiser, what are you telling? The guy has to re-give meiser, but the case of the meiser was, the original source had meiser taken from it. What grew out of it did not. So what are you requiring him to do? Now you have a lot of growth from it. You should retake meiser. That's going strict. Then I would say, gedulin mevatlan ikar. If it leads to a strict halacha, then I would say the growth can neutralize the ikar, the main. In this case, what we're discussing over here, if I say the 8th neutralizes the 7th, that means you're going lenient, because you're saying I can eat the whole produce over here. It doesn't have a din shmita. And that, how do you know that you would go lenient and say, I'm permitted to eat this whole thing and there's no Shemitah here anymore? That's the question. Ella min hadar. Let's find another source. The Tanya we learned in a brisa. Rab Shimon Aimer. Rab Shimon says, we go to Nuches Amud Aleph. Now here is the here's the Nuches Amud Aleph. And there it says, Kol davar sheyesh lo matirim. Let me explain. Let's say you have a tray for a piece of meat, so that you can never eat that tray for piece of meat. It never becomes permitted to eat. So therefore, we have a lachus. If they get mixed up in a pot of other tray of kosher meat, so if there's 60 times more kosher meat than the tray for meat, it becomes neutralized. But if it's a type of isser that you could potentially permit it to be eaten, so then it never becomes bottle. In other words, it can never become neutralized. What's an example? Kol davar sheyesh lo matirim. If you have an object that you can't eat it, but potentially you could eat it, could go in tevel. Let's say an apple that you didn't take off trumas and maisros from. So potentially you could take off trumas and maisros from the apple. If that apple gets mixed up with other apples 1,000 times, it will be still forever be usher. Why? Because you could just take off away from it and say, I'm taking off apple on the apple that I dropped in there. I'm taking off Trumas Maisers. Umaisa Sheni, the Hegdish. Let's say you have Hegdish. Another good example. You have an apple that belongs to the Beis Hamikdash. It dropped into your bunch of apples. So you don't say, oh, I have 60 times more apples or 60 times more fruit to mevatel, to neutralize the Hegdish apple that fell in. You wouldn't say that. Why? Because potentially you could redeem the apple and put it on money. You can say, oh, apple, you're in this mixture. I'm redeeming you on cash that I have. So since you could do that, it can never become neutralized. So therefore, the Chodesh is another example, which eventually, over time, becomes permitted to eat. The Chachamim did not say you can neutralize something if it's 60 times more. It's forever going to remain asa. The chol davar, any item that's asa, she'ein lemitim, it can never become mutter to go in truma. Let's say you have an apple of truma, right? If it falls into a truma, it can never become untruma. You have an apple of truma, you can't make it not truma anymore. So then there are shiurim. If by truma, actually, you have to have 200 times more of chulin to neutralize the truma, but it could become neutralized. Or trumas maisa, b'chala, b'olav, b'klei kerem. All these things are things that can never change. If something is meiser or something is chala or orla, it always remains orla. You cannot change the item from its isser. So it's davar she'ein le matirim. It has no possibility of ever become permitted to eat. So therefore, Nasnu Chachamim Shi'ur, the Chachamim gave a Shi'ur that you could neutralize it. If you have enough of Heter, it could neutralize these Isurim, Truma, Trumas Maisa, Chal, and Orla. So that's what Rab Shimon said. Amru Lai, so they told Rab Shimon, V'alei Shvius ein lo matirim, v'loi Nasnu bo Chachamim Shi'ur. Now here, he's talking about the same onion case. And he's talking about Shemitah. They asked Rab Shimon, if you took a 6th-year onion, a 6-year bulb onion, right on the left side of the screen. So, and you planted it in the Shemitah year. So we say that this whole thing forever remains usher. It has a din Shemitah. So they asked him a question, why would I say that? That's what his question is. Shemitah has no heter. Chachamim didn't give a shear. Even if it grew just a tiny bit, let's say the bulb, you have an onion, and it grew, and you planted it, a 6-year onion, okay? You have a 6-year onion. You planted it in Shemitah, and a tiny piece of green grew out of it. The whole onion is a din like a Shemitah onion. Why? It's Shemitah is something as an issa that can never be permitted. And therefore, if the principal source is bigger than what grows out of it, it should be neutralized. The Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Shemitah, Iseres Kol Shehu B'mira. If it grows just a little bit in Shemitah, the whole onion becomes aser. So why do we say that? Why don't we say the 6th year should be able to neutralize the Shemitah? We'll look at the Shemitah part of the onion, the drop that grows from it, the little green that grows out of the onion, as if it's like treifa meat. And you have a big onion over there that's from the 6th year. Why don't we say the 6th year should neutralize the 7th year growth, and the whole onion should be permitted to be eaten? Answers the Gemara, Amar Lehen, he said like this, really it would be neutralized. But you have to try to eat it, since there's an Isser on Shemitah to eat after a certain time. You must eat it during the Shemitah year. Let's say, certain items of food have different schedules when you're supposed to get rid of it. So since you potentially, even if you view it as a 6th year item, but potentially you don't have to neutralize the Shemitah part of it. You can eat it, but try to eat it before before the time that you have to get rid of it. So that's what we say. We view it as a Shemitah. In other words, we encourage you to eat it in the 7th year right away. Don't leave it around. But let's say you planted it. Let's say you planted the 6th year onion way after this Zman beer. Okay, you planted it and then it grew. So then, if it grew b'nois and tam, so we view it as a Shemitah onion. But the question is, why why don't we say that? Why the question is, why don't we view the growth as part of the 6th year? So basically, what the Gemara's question is that if you plant something in the 6th year, right? If you plant it in the 6th year, why do we view this as Shemitah? Why don't we view this as 6th year produce? It must be the green that comes out of it. The green that comes out of it is not a 6th year. It's a Shemitah. And therefore we view it as a Shemitah. That's what we clearly see from this brisa. So therefore, that is a strict way. We're viewing it as a Shemitah onion. So let's go in reverse. When you take a Shemitah onion, a 7th year onion on the other side, and it grows in the 8th year, you should view it as an 8th year onion. So that's what the Gemara is trying to prove from this case. So the Gemara says, "V'dilma haname lechumra shani." That's, again, you're going strict. You're going strict by viewing the 6th, when you plant it in the 6th year, and it grows in the 7th year, to view it as a Shemitah onion is because you're going strict. But our clear question is, you took a Shemitah onion and you're planting it in the 8th year, and now you want to say that this is an 8th year onion. Who says you would go lenient in that case? Ella, Ella min hada pshata.
But can I just say one thing?
Yeah, sure.
But I just don't. I'm trying to understand why they're making it so complicated. I understand they have their intent, like Rabbi Shimon trying to do lakula. But if they go back to the original idea that everything, no matter how much of the growth from the origin grows, once it becomes the original entity, whether it's lakula or lachumra, you have to go according to what the laws were according to the original entity. And it makes much more sense whether it's lakula or lachumra.
Correct. But what the problem with this situation, what the Gemara is dealing here, is that normally, let's say I have an apple, a Hegdish apple or something like that gets mixed up, or like an Orla apple that gets mixed up with others. So then they're different entities. So you can say the hectare neutralizes the Isser.
But that's different entities. But I'm talking about if there's a connection, whether it's 6 to 7 or 8 to 7, there's some type of connection with growth, then there should be, according to what the origin, all the way back to first generation, whatever the halacha was for that. Different entities, absolutely, I agree. There has to be some type of, differentiation. But if it's the origin, whether it's 6 to 7, 7 to 8, or 8 to 7, you have to go according to what the origin was, if there's a connection to it.
I hear what you're asking. But the Gemara wants to hold on to the belief that when it's still connected, in this case, you always go after the origin. You go after the origin.
Right.
So then why do we view this, if it was the origin was a 6, why do we view it as a Shemitah onion? We should view it as...
You're going after the growth then, not the second generation, not the origin. That's exactly opposite, right?
Yeah, so the answer is because you're going after as a 7th, because there, by saying so, then it'd be strict. By saying it's 7.
So there is an idea of a chumrah a little cooler here. I get it. Right. Otherwise, you would have to go according to what the 6th, not the 7th.
Right. You would go to 6 and say, oh, it's nothing.
Right.
Now that you're saying it's the 7th, remember, once you say something's a Shemitah onion, it has Kedusha and you have to eat it at a certain times. It's more stricter.
Right.
Maybe you say that, you say that they're separate entities to go strict. But
what if you would let it grow? Because onions can grow multiple years. What if you would go from 6 to 8?
No, but as long as they're connected, you see, as long as they're connected over here and still nourishing from that, you see, I can see that
6th was fine. What if it grew from 6th, 7th, and then 8th, and then you wanted to eat it year 8? Because an onion can grow; it grows seeds at year after 2 years. That
the Gemara doesn't have that answer yet.
Right, but theoretically,
it could grow.
You're not going strict, because then you're going from what's allowed to what's allowed. So whatever's year 7 should be gone at that point.
Correct. maybe the Brisa doesn't address that case. The Brisa only says when it goes from 6 to 7, you view it as a 7. So then you don't.
I just looked up, I just Googled how do you get the beginning of an onion? It doesn't make sense. One onion can't make one onion because then we'd have no more onions. So
Right.
at year 2, it starts growing what's called onion seeds, and then you can plant, and lots of seeds come out of the plant on year 2, and then you can plant those.
Right.
So all I'm saying is at year 8, theoretically, it goes back to where it's allowed.
I think the Gemara is going to get to that. The Gemara is, by the way, Steve, that's the conclusion of the Gemara. The Gemara is going to conclude that, yes, they are separate entities. That's the conclusion of the Gemara. You're right. But the Gemara is leading up to that. You're right. It's the separate entities. And even though I can really look at it, I see the 7th year Shemitah onion right there on my screen. But you're right. Once you have all this growth coming out of it, it becomes a 8th year. But the Gemara is going to lead up to that. So the Gemara says, Element Hadah. Pshat. Let's solve the dilemma from here. The Tanakh we learned in the Mishnah. Again, 6th year onion that rain fell on it and it grew, and it sprouted in the 7th year. So now, if they have green, this is a dark green leaves. So then asurin, then it's asur, because where did it grow from? It grew from the ground. So it's the growth came from the Shemitah ground. Hayriku, but if it's like whitish, so mutarim, then mutter, because then it grew from the onion itself, and it took no nourishment from the ground. So that's why in the picture I'm showing a green growth, because it's taking its nourishment from the soil. But if you see it's just white coming out of it, then it's coming from the onion itself. Now, Rab Chanina ben Atignis, Rab Chanina ben Singh says, I have another way to tell if it's coming, the nourishment from the ground, the growth. If you could pull the whole thing out of the ground by its leaves, asurin, it's asur. Fine. So that tells you that it grew in the 7th year. Now, here's the key point. Ukinegdan will do the opposite case. Limatzoi shvius. If you took a 7th year onion and you planted it in the 8th year, mutarin, it's permitted. Perfect. That's the solving of our problem. Like you want to say. That I don't care if it's a 7th year onion. If it grew so much in the 8th year, it's an 8th year onion. That's what the Brisa says. Remember, this will come to teach me the geduli heter malin as a iser. Not only that, what grows beheter, what the growth neutralizes the iser. In fact, you wouldn't even look at the original onion as a Shemitah onion. It's totally neutralized by the growth that comes out of it. That's what the Gemara seems to conclude now. So the Gemara says, how do you know that Bryce is talking about the onion? The original onion is still intact. The dilma bid. Maybe it was crushed. And therefore, if it was crushed, the original onion is not there anymore. That's why the growth over there neutralizes the original Isser. But our case is what I'm showing you on the screen, that the original onion, the 7th year onion, still is intact. And all this growth came out of it. Who says maybe you still look at the whole growth as a Shemitah onion? Element Hadah. Only from the following case you can solve the dilemma. The Tanya we learned in a Brisa, we go to Amud Beis, Hamanakis imakusi b'chasoyas. Someone who weeds with a goy, we call him a goy, and he's weeding out onions, types of onions, chasoyas, types of onions. Oichel mehen achilas arai. Then you can eat. You don't have to take off trumas and maestros. You could just pop an onion if your job is to work with the goy in his field. You could pop an onion and eat it without taking off trumas and maestros because it's temporary. Uma'asrum vadai, but when you have to take off maestros from it, because really the land is a Jewish land, so it's chayev b'maestros. We know for a fact that a kusi, the Samaritans, although they pretended to be Jewish, they never took off maestros. So when you want to eat it permanently, you would have to take off maestros. Rab Shimon Omer, Rab Shimon, this is the key. Rab Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Rab Shimon ben Elazar says, "Im Yisrael choshud al hashviyis." If you have a Jew, okay, you have Jews who don't keep the Shemitah, okay, non-from Jew that doesn't keep Shemitah. So then, if lemoitzoy shvius mutter, he says that if you plant that onion in that onion of the yid, a yid who didn't keep shmita, gave you an onion, and you planted it in your field and it grew on the 8th year, it's mutter. That's exactly our case. You took an onion of shmita, you planted it in the 8th year. Again, you're not supposed to do this. You're supposed to get rid of shmita produce, but you planted it on the 8th year, it's mutter. So remember, we see clearly the geduli heter malanas iser, that what grows beheter will neutralize the iser, and therefore we view the whole onion, all the greens, even the bulb itself, the original bulb, as neutralized. It's all 8th year onion. So the Gemara says, how do you know Rav Shimon ben Elazar was talking about onions? V'dilma b'davar shezare kola. Maybe he's talking about apple seeds. If I take a Shemitah apple seeds, like Steve, you wanted to say, you take a Shemitah apple seed and I plant it in the ground. So there, everybody agrees what grows out of it is not the original source anymore. It totally disintegrates. Cesare, the seed, kola, would cease to exist. So maybe Rav Shimon ben Elazar was talking about such a case. So the Gemara says that's not true, because Rav Shimon ben Elazar is talking about chesoyas. Hatanya, we learned in the Brisa, Eilahen chesoyas. What's a chesoyas? He's talking about these produce. Kagoin haluf, alum, shum is garlic. Garlic grows like the same way as potatoes or onions grow. Babitzolim. These are type of things that we were discussing. And clearly, Rav Shimon ben Elazar says that if you plant it on the 8th year, it's permitted. So the Gemara says, wait, maybe Rav Shimon ben Elazar only allowed you to eat it. Maybe the original bulb was crushed. In other words, it's you don't have the original bulb. You don't have the 7th year onion. It's maybe seeds or something like that, but not the original bulb like we're seeing in the picture. Answers the Gemara, Choshud ala shvius katani. But we're talking about a guy who's choshud on shmita, a guy who doesn't keep shmita. So why would he crush an onion? He'll give you the whole onion and say, plant it, do what you want with it. He'll give you the whole entire Shemitah onion. So again, we're talking about a guy who took a whole entire Shemitah onion and planted it in the 8th year, and it's clearly that it's permitted. So therefore, says Gemara, the Dilma b'taroivis, maybe it's taroivis. In other words, maybe we don't allow you to eat the entire onion. But what we're saying is that this Shemitah onion got mixed up, and this got mixed up with other entities of non-Shemitah onions. There it could be mutter, but not this original growth itself. Maybe if one of these dislodged and got mixed up with other onions, then you could say it gets neutralized. But how do you know it itself can neutralize itself? How do you see that it's neutralizing itself? Maybe that's what Reb Shimon ben Elazar was talking about. Answers the Gemara, Hamanakash Ketani. But he's talking a guy pulling out onions from the ground. So he's pulling out one onion. So again, he took a 7th year bulb onion, planted it in the ground. It grew this tremendous growth. Reb Shimon ben Elazar says, just pick it up and you can eat it. And it has a din like an 8th year onion. So we see that the growth neutralizes the original Isser. So now this leads us with one last question, then we'll stop. Let me teheve to Yufta Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yonasan. But we just brought before Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yonasan in the original page, who both say that growth does not neutralize the growth does not neutralize the original source. Remember, Rabbi Yochanan talked about the grapes that grew, the Orla grapes that were grafted into an old tree.
Exactly. That's the only thing that doesn't fit, the Orla. Meiser, it fits. Everything else, it fits. But the Orla, it doesn't fit because it goes back to the origin.
It goes back to the origin. We said over here that it remains a Yalda Shesivka Zakenu, Ball Paris, Apan Pisha Sifa Masayan. Rabbi Yochanan says it's Aser. And also Rabbi Yonasan said another idea, a butzel, an onion, of an onion that was kalayim, right? An onion that was planted next to a vineyard. So it's kalayim onion. Even if you remove the kalayim, you remove the vineyard. So now you have the onion just growing by itself, it will forever remain aser. But we're just saying once something grows, it gets neutralized. That's what we're trying to say. So the Gemara answers, what's the difference? So Gemara says a fascinating teretz. There's a difference between Shemitah and kalayim and Orla. Let me tell you the truth to Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yonason. Rabbi Yitzchak Shanya Shmiyas. Shmita can neutralize itself. Hoyo the Isure Ayadei Karka. Betelose Name Ayadei Karka. Since the Shemitah, what makes something Aser Shemitah? Because it nourished itself during the Shemitah year. The original bulb onion got its nourishment during the 7th year, so it's a 7th year onion. So now, what's causing the growth to grow? What's causing the green to come out of it? 8th year stuff, right? So therefore, it can neutralize the original onion. But let's say the original onion was an Arla onion, or let's say the original onion was a Kliakaram, was a Klayim onion. It was a non-edible onion. What's inside of it? It's grapes are inside of this onion. So even though it grew, it can't be neutralized because the grape taste, I don't know, or something like that, is not neutralized by something that grows from the ground.
There's no intermediary like the karka was.
Right. So there's no karka over there. The
karka was like an intermediary. It was interruption.
That's right. So therefore, by Shemitah, this idea would work. That if this grew in the 8th year, it can neutralize the 7th year. Kalayim, or let's say this was a grape. Imagine it was a grape and it grew into a larger size, but the original grape was an Orla grape. The growth happened because of it got nutrients from the ground. But the original Isser was not a ground Isser. It was a time Isser. So then it will forever remain Asser. So that's what it remains.
Very good.
Shvi is but not Orla and Kalayim. Okay.